The 2024 Arizona State Sun Devils football team finishes number 7 in the final AP poll, and it feels just right.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. A shout out to my everydayers who are here every day, and thanks to all of you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bet if your first bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back in to the show. And today, I waited. I purposefully waited to make this show a little bit later in the day. So happy afternoon. Happy Tuesday afternoon to you guys. This is the final AP poll for the Arizona State Sun Devils. They finished number 7. I got to tell you, I feel pretty good about that. But later on in the show, I got to pitch the argument about why ASU should be better. And we're going to talk at the very end of the show about the precedent of this and where ASU should start 2025. But I like this. I feel really, really good about this ranking. Borderline feels perfect. Let me explain. To me, there are three main factors that came into the equation for why ASU finished number 7. Now, in case you're wondering, the top 6 is in order here. So starting with number 1, no surprise, Ohio State, Notre Dame, Oregon, Texas, Penn State, and Georgia. I don't have a problem with any of those teams being ahead of the Sun Devils. Here's why. Number 1, I think that this ranking perfectly reflects the way that ASU had played in their playoff appearance. And in the first ever college football playoff appearance for the Sun Devils, this to me is a perfect spot for where they finished. Number 7, because you look at the teams ahead of them, and they all were in the semifinals, which obviously they deserve to be ahead. But the two teams that were knocked out of the quarterfinal, which was number 3 Oregon and number 6 Georgia, if you were to ask me why they're ranked ahead of ASU, I could give you a handful of reasons. And not just the bias reasons of, it's brand value, it's SEC, it's Oregon, it's blah, blah, blah. Like, you could factor that in, and it definitely did factor in. There's not going to be any denying that. But they are just better football teams. Now, do I think ASU could play them tough? Absolutely, I do. But we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show. But it makes sense to me that even though their games weren't as good as ASU, and certainly Oregon just got throttled, but they got throttled by the national champions. So, I mean, if you were going to get crushed by someone, at least you're getting crushed by the best team in college football. And then Georgia played Notre Dame, the runner-up in the college football season. Very, very close. I mean, that was a great football game. So you can't really complain that the two teams that finished ahead of ASU that were also knocked out of the quarterfinal are Oregon and Georgia. Now, I do applaud the final poll for placing us ahead of Boise State, because we always should have been ahead of Boise State. They got it right. So much respect for making sure that we were ahead of Boise. No problem with being behind the Final Four teams, and no problem being behind Oregon and Georgia. Here is the second factor that comes into why ASU is perfectly placed at number 7. It's because it reflects how they played all year, it could have very easily seen ASU lower than number 7. ASU arguably was a Cinderella team this year. They caught fire. They were not fire. They caught lightning in a bottle. Well, they did catch fire. Whatever, neither here nor there. And everything just went right for them. But you know who else did that? Indiana. You know where Indiana finished? Number 10. Right about where they were. But, I mean, you could have argued they should have been ranked higher. How about SMU? They only lost 2 games all year. 3 games. They lost 3 games. Their game to BYU, they lost the ACC championship, and then they were run off the field in their playoff appearance. You know where they finished? Number 12. I don't necessarily have an issue with that, but you know who was ahead of them? Ole Miss. Ole Miss didn't make the playoff. Why are they ahead of them? Well, that's just kind of the short end of the stick that you drawed. Okay. How about Iowa State? Second place in the Big 12, right? Well, they're number 15. You wouldn't have a problem with that, except that BYU is number 13. BYU, third place. Why are you ahead of Iowa State? That's kind of a subjective opinion. There's some other very questionable spots. Alabama is still number 17. Miami is still number 18. There was some questionable placements in here. So it would not have been a surprise for ASU to have been questionably placed. There was a very realistic scenario where they get put behind Boise State. Heck, they could have been put behind Tennessee, who was number 9, simply because of that SEC bias. But thankfully, it did appear that the AP poll recognized and understood that ASU way overachieved this year, considering what they were supposed to do, but also just played really good football this year. I mean, they stepped up to their competition all year long. That was something I talked about every single week. I can't remember the last time as a football fan, either of ASU or my beloved Baltimore Ravens, who broke my heart on Sunday night. Don't worry, I have recovered. But I can't remember the last time I saw one of those two teams that I cheer for consistently play up to their competition. Normally you see the opposite. They play to their competition. They play lower to their competition. And yet that wasn't ASU this year. Like, sure, early in the year, you barely beat Texas State, but you're also talking about week 3. That was a much different football team. The rest of the year, when they faced good competition, they stepped up to BYU. They stepped up to Kansas State. They stepped up to Iowa State. And they certainly stepped up to Texas. Let's talk about that for a second. That was a winnable football game, and they took Texas to double overtime. Now, unfortunately, we're only going to remember the final 3 plays of that game. 4th and 13, the touchdown pass to Matthew Golden to extend it to second overtime. Gunnar Helms, touchdown reception on the very first play of second overtime. And Sam Leavitt's interception by Andrew Mukuba on the first play of ASU's drive in the second part of double overtime. Those are the 3 plays that we have to remember. But goodness, ASU played a great team. They played a very great team, and they took them to the wire, and they were arguably the better team that day. I respect it. And then the last part of this point, before we get to my third and final reason why this is perfect, is they just were a hot football team last year. So you got to respect that ASU had finished the year as well as they did. And to stomp out the teams that they played, got to give them their respect. The final reason here for why this is a perfect ranking is because the teams ahead of ASU, if you were to play a 10-game series, all 10 games, neutral site, head-to-head, they probably do not win that series. Some of them are like 6-4, but you may have some 7-3 or 8-2 situations. That is totally understandable. I do not think any team ahead of you sweeps you. Even Ohio State, I think that ASU could get 1. But man, would it be close. Ohio State was really good this year. And it wouldn't surprise me if they swept them. But I think that the teams ahead of you more than likely win a 10-game neutral site head-to-head series. And that's the way that those things should come down and end with at the end of the day when you are making a ranking is the teams that are ahead of X team, the teams that are ahead of Arizona State, are they better than Arizona State, and would they beat them in neutral site? The answer is yes. The teams ahead of them would beat Arizona State in a neutral site. And the answer is yes. The teams ahead of them are better football teams. So those are all important here. Why is it a perfect ranking? Well, it reflects ASU's standing from their playoff finish. It reflects the way that ASU had played the 2024 football season. And it reflects the way that ASU is probably playing in a 10-game head-to-head series at a neutral site with the number 1 through number 6 teams ahead of them. Of course, I'm always here to play devil's advocate, and I'm here to tell you that ASU should have been higher. Not could have been higher, should have been higher. Hear me out. We're going to talk about that coming up next. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Time to talk to you guys about our friends over at FanDuel. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 wins. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is really easy to navigate, and there are a variety of bets to keep every game exciting. And when you win, you get paid instantly. There's no waiting around for your winnings. So whether you're betting on your favorite team or you're just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thanks as always for making Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. And of course, a shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. Hear me out. ASU should have been ranked higher than number 7. How high? Let's talk about it. I stand firm. I love number 7. But if I'm to play devil's advocate, or here, how about this? Instead of devil's advocate, let me put on my super biased Arizona State hat. Let me put on the most biased hat that I possibly could here. ASU should have been ranked higher. Here's why. Number 1, just flat out, they are not definitively worse than most of the teams ahead of them. In fact, I think there's only 2 teams I would say ASU is definitively worse than, or, that are definitively better than ASU. That would be Ohio State and Oregon. The rest of the teams, I think ASU stacks up pretty well. Notre Dame, great football team. Unfortunately, they were really banged up by the end of the year. They didn't have Benjamin Morrison, and they didn't have Riley Mills, arguably their 2 best defensive players. They were a very hot football team, and they were a terrific defense. They also had arguably the best running back in college football, who wasn't Ashton Genty or Cam Scadaboo in Jeremiah Love. Certainly the best running back who was not draft eligible. And Riley Leonard was playing very good at quarterback. I think ASU could beat them. Texas, we know that ASU could have beat them. Texas being number 4, that says that if ASU could have beat the number 4 team, maybe ASU should have been number 4. I don't know. Penn State, number 5. I was very vocal about my lack of respect, we can call it what it was, for Penn State. They proved me wrong for sure. They played way better football starting in the Big Ten championship game than I had given them credit for all year long. But that was still a beatable football team, and Drew Aller did not step up when it mattered most. I think ASU could have taken advantage of him the way that they took advantage of Quinn Ewers. Georgia at number 6, the last team that's ahead. But Georgia's Georgia. That was a beatable team this year. Gunnar Stockton, he played very well in relief of an injured Carson Beck. He had no weapons. There was no one that was seriously worthy of being a legitimate option for Georgia. Like Dominic Leavitt, he's fine, but the rest of their weapons not great. Trevor Etienne did not get the job done at running back. Benjamin Urasek was supposed to be their number 1 tight end. He wasn't a factor at all this year. And even if it was due to injury, I straight up could look at his stats and be like, that is a non-factor. ASU should have been able to boat race them offensively. And even against a good Georgia defense, it's still not the Georgia defenses that we've seen in the past. This was one of the most beatable Georgia teams that we've seen in quite a while. ASU maybe could have handled them. Here's another reason why ASU should be ranked higher. Because of the teams that were knocked out in the quarterfinal, ASU just played better. Certainly better than Oregon did. But again, to Oregon's credit, not only are they a better football team, but they were run off the field by Ohio State. That's pretty understandable. Georgia, who lost in the semifinal game, or quarterfinal game, they had a decent game against Notre Dame. At the end of the day, when you watch that game, it felt like Georgia was overmatched for 60 minutes, but they made a good game out of it. Nonetheless, I think ASU would have been better. But you also lost to the runner-up, so I understand why you're ahead of them. But still, and obviously they played better than Boise State. To have ASU as the third best team from the quarterfinals is something I understand, but again, my super biased hat is on right now, and I would tell you that is shenanigans. ASU should have been ahead of them. ASU was also probably ranked without Jordyn Tyson coming into play. Jordyn Tyson, one of the best receivers in college football last year, certainly one of the best receivers in the Big 12. He got injured in the U of A game. We did not have him for the Big 12 championship, and we did not have him against Texas in the Peach Bowl. Injuries happen. It's a part of the game. I literally just talked about Notre Dame not having two of their best defensive players. It happens. But if Jordyn Tyson does play those games, I think that ASU could win in much more blowout fashion. But I think that ASU could have let's try again. ASU could have made a much better case to beat Texas in regulation, not even taking that game to overtime. You take it into account for sure. I understand. But I feel like you could have taken more consideration into what ASU was when Jordyn Tyson was on the field. And finally, I think we can all agree there's definitely some brand name bias here. There's no doubt the 6 teams ahead of ASU are much more popular. Ohio State, the most popular team in college football. No doubt about it. No doubt. They're blue blood too. Notre Dame, blue blood program. They are the independents of college football, so their fan base, pretty rowdy. They also finished second place. Oregon, not as many bandwagon fans as you're going to have. Now, Oregon still has good fans, don't get me wrong, but a lot of people like Oregon, a lot of people like those jerseys. They're one of the teams to be a fan of right now. Texas, blue blood, and Texas is Texas. Penn State, blue blood. Penn State has been around forever. They have their own thing. They are state university. And Georgia. That is a borderline blue blood. And that has been one of the most dominant teams of the last 10 years and certainly the last 5 years. And then you have ASU. They certainly do not have the brand yet. They're going to get there, don't worry. But there's no denying that these teams that were placed ahead of ASU have way bigger brand value compared to the Arizona State University Sun Devils. It is what it is. Let me go ahead and take off my bias cap now and tell you that I lean more with it being a perfect ranking compared to ASU should have been higher. I could make some decent arguments, and I think I have some decent arguments there. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Where should ASU start 2025? Well, unfortunately, this ranking probably will not influence it, but that doesn't mean that this shouldn't be some kind of outline to follow. Let me explain coming up next. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This message is brought to you by Prize Picks, the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions, you heard me, billions in winnings. Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports, whether it's the playoffs or the regular season. Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football action. Now it's playoff time. There's no better place to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You're going to pick a player. You're going to pick more or less on a certain statistic for at least 2 players. If your pick hits, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. Yeah, 1,000 times your money just for making a few simple picks. Now, I'm going into this championship weekend for the NFL. There's a few things I like. I love Travis Kelce's receptions, and I love Josh Allen for rushing touchdowns. Jaden Daniels for rushing yards will be interesting. And let me also look at that Jalen Hurts rushing touchdowns as well. Probably Saquon over on those rushing yards. It's fun. It's easy. You get to predict it. And with Prize Picks, Flex Play, you can double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Run your game this season with Prize Picks. Download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONCollege. Get $50 instantly after you place your first $5 lineup. That's $50 just for playing when you use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Prize Picks, run your game. You guys are the best for making Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day, and a special shout out to my everydayers who are here every day. All right. Where should ASU start next season? Well, it's kind of a loaded question. And one of the biggest reasons why is because this final list will probably not affect the preseason at all. Now, I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing. The biggest example, Boise State finished number 8. Do you really think they're going to start number 8 next year? They're losing some really good players. They're losing Ashton Jeanty, the runner-up to the Heisman Trophy. They are losing a lot. And Jeanty alone is going to drop them significantly. Now, do I think they start in the top 25? I think you have to. I wouldn't be surprised if they flat out took them out. That is a hard team to project. I don't think Indiana's going to start that high. I don't think Iowa State's going to start that high. I don't think SMU. I don't think Clemson. None of those teams are going to start as high as where they are right now. And ASU might not start as high. Now, let me get this out of the way. This needs to be the baseline for Arizona State at a minimum. They should be no lower than 7. That is the absolute lowest that ASU should be in the upcoming ranking for the preseason. When we get that in June, July, August, whenever, it will eventually drop. That is the lowest ASU can be, is number 7. There are too many returners. There are too many coaches. There's too much here that is running it back for ASU. Your starting quarterback, your number 1 receiver, 4 of your 5 starting offensive linemen, your number 1 tight end, almost your entire running back field, even without Cam Scadaboo, pretty much your entire defense, and you've upgraded across the roster. There is too much that's returning. And you made some really big moves in the transfer portal, and you got a good recruiting class coming in. Your entire coaching staff is in place as well. That you can't put them lower because of that. You have them finish number 7. That's the bare minimum. There's teams ahead of ASU too. And I think going into next year, they would have a legitimate shot to beat. I think right now, ASU beats Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame. Texas is reloading the majority of that team. That offensive line is decimated. Your top 3 receivers are gone. Your top 2 running backs are gone. Your number 1 tight end is gone. Your starting quarterback is gone. They're losing pieces on defense like Jade Barron, which is a huge loss for them. There's a lot that Texas has to replace. And Texas recruits great, and we all know who Arch Manning is. We also know that he's got 3 5-star receivers coming in that already joined Ryan Wingo. It's one of the two. They have everything in place, but ASU took them to the wire, and now you're looking at a Texas team that's having to replace a lot, especially that offensive line. I would take ASU in that game. Penn State, they're losing Abdul Carter. They're losing Tyler Warren. That offensive line's going to be banged up. Drew Aller's back. Their running backs are back, and some of their defensive players are back too. But I think ASU would have beat them this year, and I think ASU could beat them next year. Plus, Sam Leavitt, better than Drew Aller. Notre Dame, that's a team with a lot to replace. And they have been heavy on transfer quarterbacks the last few years. Sam Hartman was 2023. He was very good. Riley Leonard this year took him to the national championship game. I don't know who's next. And I don't know if this team is going to continue to be sustainable through the transfer portal. Now, we could say the same about Arizona State, and we know that Notre Dame recruits, but they've got a lot to prove because they have been rolling with transfer quarterbacks over the last several years. I think ASU beats those teams. Texas, Penn State, Notre Dame. Georgia and Oregon. I think they can challenge Georgia and Oregon. Georgia was beatable this year. They're going to be rolling with Gunnar Stockton next year to replace Carson Beck, which is a big deal. I know Beck didn't have a great season, but I think that was incredibly representative of losing Ladd McConkey and losing Brock Bowers. That was always going to be difficult for him, and he just didn't have a good year. Gunnar Stockton is going to go into next year. The weapons aren't elite. They are getting Zachariah Branch, and that is a very big deal. But is he going to be ready? We're going to find out. Oregon, they're reloading a lot too. Now, that defense remains deep. But you're going to be losing a lot of your receivers. Tez Johnson is gone. Not Isaiah Bond. Trayshawn Holden is gone. Evan Stewart announced he's coming back. They're losing Jordan James, their running back. They're losing Terrence Ferguson, their tight end. And Dylan Gabriel, their starting quarterback, is gone. Now, they have quarterback options. Dante, oh my God, what's his name? Why can't I remember? He should have been in the Arizona State Sun Devil for sure. I seriously can't remember his name. I'm going to have to look it up because that is going to Dante Moore. There we go. Dante Moore is there. Achilles Smith Jr. is there. Yes, the same Achilles Smith. They've got options there, and they got a ton of weapons as well. But replacing your quarterback is not going to be easy. I think ASU could challenge Oregon. I think they could challenge Georgia. The teams that may find themselves ahead of ASU, and I do not agree with this at all, but this may be a factor. Alabama, Tennessee, Ole Miss. What do they have in common? SEC teams and good football teams. They should not, in any world, start ahead of ASU, but we could see it, and it wouldn't be a surprise. BYU could start ahead of ASU. Why? Well, they're the people's Big 12 champion, and everyone loves BYU, and look at everything they're bringing back, to which I say ASU's bringing back more, and we already beat them. But BYU, everyone loves BYU. They could start ahead of ASU. And then don't sleep on Miami. Miami just brought in Carson Beck. They still have weapons. I know replacing Restrepo, their leading receiver, is going to be difficult. I know they're losing some players on both sides of the field, but they're bringing back elite pass rushers. They're bringing back an elite offensive line. I expect Damian Martinez, their starting running back, to return. That's going to be a good team. They could start ahead of ASU. Also, look at those teams. Bama, Tennessee, Ole Miss, BYU, Miami. Most of them, not all of them, most of them have way bigger brand value than Arizona State does. It could happen. So let's put it all together. ASU should be no lower than number 7. That is the baseline. That's the baseline. You cannot put ASU any lower than number 7. But quite frankly, I think that there is a serious argument to be made that they are top 5. Seriously. They should have a very serious discussion about being one of the top 5 teams in the nation going into the 2025 season. There are 4 teams ahead of ASU right now that I definitively think should be ahead of ASU, and that's Ohio State, Georgia. Let me try again. Ohio State, Georgia, Oregon, and Notre Dame. But Notre Dame is entirely precedented on what they do in the offseason. They're replacing a lot. Oh, my God, that defense, dude. That defense is losing everyone. Benjamin Morrison, probably gone. Xavier Watts, gone. Riley Mills, gone. Their other defensive tackle, gone. Jack Kaiser, gone. They're losing so much defensively. They're losing their starting quarterback. Jeremiah Love is back. That offensive line should remain intact. But they got a lot to prove. And if they do, then yes, they should start ahead of ASU in the poll. Now, I would argue that they're better than Penn State and they're better than Texas and that ASU should be placed ahead of them. But you got to take into account brand value and the fact that Penn State and Texas finished higher in the playoff than ASU did. It just is what it is. But you know what? At the end of the day, ASU should start next year no worse than number 7, and they have an argument to be number 5. I mean, based off what I'm saying here, I only think that there's 4 teams that should definitively be ahead of ASU. One of those teams is kind of up in the air with Notre Dame, and then Penn State and Texas will probably start ahead of ASU. I make an argument for them. So there you go. 7, literally number 7, with the 6 teams ahead of them. I think they could be a little bit higher. But I'll tell you what, this AP poll, the final AP poll, number 7 for ASU, I made the argument for them to be higher, but I stick by what I said at the top of the show, and that it is a perfect spot for ASU. Number 7. Love it. I feel like ASU got the respect that they deserve. But what do you guys think? Was number 7 too low? Was number 7 just right? Or are you crazy and think that number 7 was too high for them? Asking Arizona State fans, because I know there's going to be some biased fans in my comments. But don't worry. I love you guys just the same as I do my everydayers who always get that special shout out. And I love each and every one of you that makes Locked On Sun Devils your first listen of the day. Thank you guys so much. If you want to stay in touch with the show, go ahead, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications. We're posting all the time. You don't want to miss any content that is coming out. You can also follow me on Twitter at Richie Bradshaw36 and the podcast at LO_Sun Devil, so you can stay up to date with everything that way. Once again, I appreciate my everydayers who are here every day. Thanks to all of you for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow. I have got something special on deck. Should be up Friday. That is touch and go. I will let you know. But tomorrow, we got to talk a little bit about 2025. And we got to start wrapping up 2024 at some point. It feels like now is the right time to do it. So again, turn on notifications. I'll see you next time. Until then, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.